Okay, everyone, those who just joined in, welcome to the Catalyst Dialogue series. Thank you all for
hmm
coming. Perhaps you can switch on your camera or speak on the microphone, what brings you here, or even where are you from? And as you can see, Professor Steve Jones also on camera here, who's going to give us a wonderful talk.
Yeah, I'll try my best to keep an eye on the chat as we go through and to make this just kind of something where we can chat as we go through, sort of an open discussion as I'm talking about some stuff. So it would be nice to get a sense of who we're talking with. So if you want to just say, hey, I'm so and so, and here's where I'm from, and maybe a little something, little nugget about you, that would be fantastic.
Well, I'll start. I'm currently in Oxford in the UK, and I used to be Professor Jordan's student for, well, I met him in 2020, and since then we have been sort of working together in different capacity.
Yeah, big time. And I'll give a little bit about me. So I'm Steve Joordens. I normally come from a part of the eastern part of Canada, a province called New Brunswick, and came to University of Toronto after doing some graduate work at University of Waterloo. And I study all sorts of things. I was trained as a cognitive psychologist. I'm now more of an educational psychologist, I would say, but I'm also kind of a generalist. I teach intro psych. I'm one of these guys that knows a little about a lot and a lot about a little. But with psychology, I know quite a bit about. So I always enjoy any opportunity to chat psychology with anybody. I'm also, by the way, in a band and I ride motorcycles. So little fun facts if you want to give us some fun facts about yourself.
Steve does all sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm also coming to you. I'll give you a glimpse from a beautiful cottage of a friend of mine. So, by the way, stories, if you become a good storyteller, it helps you develop friendships over time. Friendships can give you free cottages sometimes. When when my friend he's in Europe right now. I'm speaking with the World Health Organization, so he was out of town for a stretch and invited us to come and stay in his cottage. So it's been beautiful.
Which part of Canada is this cottage in?
So it's in Ontario, an area called the Kawartha Lakes, which is a sort of favorite cottage area. So give you a sense of Ontario. A lot of people live in the cities and they work hard all the time in that fast-paced, crazy, especially Toronto, fast-paced, crazy city life. This is one of the places they escape to, but a 2 hour drive out of the city, up north into the more of the wilder part of Ontario, where there's beautiful lakes and loons and everything you can imagine. So this is where I don't know, unwind, I guess, a little bit when we have the opportunity. Now, those are the people who have cottages. The rest of us try to just make friends with the people who have cottages. Hey, thank you, Arushi. Great to have you here as well.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Tano. Hi, Marwa from Morocco. That's excellent. Great.
Fantastic.
We have a diverse audience today. Yeah, feel free to keep it coming. Introduce yourself because it will help Steve also adapt his talk along the way. As we know, this talk is about storytelling, so it's a very dynamic kind of session, and we hope it'll be a very fun talk for you. But before we get started, I want to sort of also tell a story a little bit about myself and about Steve. So again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you are in the world. So again, I'm Sapil, a PhD student at the University of Oxford, and I'm so excited to welcome you to today's Catalyst Dialogue. So we tell a lot of stories in our lives, and today I would like to tell you a story to introduce someone who has been, incredibly influential in my own journey, Professor Joordens, whom I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with for almost 5 years now. So, I first encountered Professor Joordens virtually back in 2020 when I enrolled in his Introduction to Psychology course at the University of Toronto. And he had what seemed like an impossible task, which is to engage over 1,600 undergraduate students online during a global pandemic. And you know what? I was one of those students. Like one of those students was actually me. But he had a way of communicating that made his lectures very engaging. He had a way of teaching that brought different concepts to life, and that the way he communicated made the content stick and made me excited to keep learning. So fast forward a bit, and I found myself actually working with Professor Jordans on research projects and educational initiatives. And I've seen him present his ideas in countless settings, right? Talking about his research, sharing insights, and showcasing Peer Scholar, which is an educational technology he co-developed that's now used in schools and universities around the world. And every time I heard him speak, I was like, wow, I would love to learn how to communicate like that. So throughout my time working with him, I've had the chance to do exactly just that. I've learned so much from Professor Jordans, not just about teaching or research, but also how to communicate, how to articulate about things. And when I reflect what makes his style so powerful, it sort of comes back to this one thing, which is storytelling. And that will be the focus of our talk today. For over 30 years, Professor Joordens has empowered learners from all over the world through the power of stories. His online courses on Coursera have reached more than 700,000 students, and he's also been awarded the 3M National Teaching Fellowship, which is one of Canada's most prestigious recognition for educational leadership and teaching. So today I'm thrilled to introduce him as he shares his talk so the listen storytelling for changemakers. So please join me in giving him a warm welcome and a big virtual round of applause, maybe through chat or reaction to Professor Joordens from the University of Toronto. So thank you, and I will let you be.
Thank you, Sapo. Yeah, really, really appreciate it. And it's really great to be here. Sapo described himself as my student, but he's become far more than that over time. We are friends, we are colleagues, we are collaborators, and I'm just sort of thrilled to watch his story kind of unfold. So storytelling, let's jump in with my side of some of that story, which is Sapo being a student in my class, first year class. And he mentioned, oh yeah, then he went on to do research with me. Well, he did research with me almost right off the bat. Almost, I don't know, maybe in his first year, second year at the latest, I think we started working together. And that's unusual. I don't do that. Typically, I will wait till a student is in roughly third year when they've had some experimental design courses, some statistics courses, things like that. Those are the students that I usually seek out to work with. So why did I work with Sapo? You've all heard the word intriguing. And I think from the very first discussion or two I had with Sapo, he intrigued me. He really did, right off the bat. And part of it was we'll come back to Peer Scholar, not to advertise Peer Scholar so much, but to just let you know what makes it kind of different or weird. Especially, I think, from Sapo's experience. The story he had sort of lived so far was one of growing up in Thailand. I'm not sure how you ended up in India, but he was anyway going to school in India as a Thai student. And a lot of the education there is what we call very teacher centric or professor centric, where a teacher or professor will hold forth and give you a whole bunch of knowledge. And your job as a student is to listen as carefully as possible and write down as much as you can and get as much in your head as possible. Peer Scholar's not like that. Peer Scholar is about developing skills like critical thinking and creative thinking, communication, collaboration. And in order to develop a skill, you have to engage in that task, whatever it is. If you want to become a better critical thinker, the only way you're going to do that is by engaging in critical thought over and over, preferably with structure, preferably with support and feedback. That's the kind of environment that Peer Scholar provides. And when Sapo ran into Peer Scholar in my course, he right away realized this was really different from anything that he had seen. And he saw the value. And so the first thing was when he was speaking with me, I have this vague memory of a chat we had, and I'm not even sure this is a true memory, but it doesn't matter with storytelling. You're not confined to the truth with storytelling. So we had this discussion, and the first thing he did to me was show me that he understood the value of Peer Scholar. Like, wow, this is different. This is whatever. And I'm like, wow, a first year student that really gets what I'm hoping, to try to do with this class. But then he took it the next step. He said, I have that school back in India where I went, and I've got a really good relationship with a lot of the teachers there. And I think this tool could bring great value to that education. Would you be interested in me introducing Peer Scholar to my previous school? And, first of all, that was exceptional and intriguing. I'm going to use this word intriguing a few times because very few times have I seen a 17 or 18-year-old who's clearly developed the relationship that he seemed to be suggesting he had with his teachers, with the principal, with the whatever, the fact that he felt like he could reach out and suggest to them a way to improve their teaching, their education, and that they would care and listen to a recent graduated student, but he seemed to think they would. And I'm like, really? That would be really interesting. And so he was actually proposing early on that we consider doing research, that we present Peer Scholar to them and do research with them. And again, this is why I said yes. It was because of Sapo's story, really, this sense of there is more to this kid than I've seen in a lot of the students that come through. He's thinking more deeply. He's forming these relationships. He is really functioning at a level beyond his years. And so that made me kind of interested in wanting to know more. And it really did start. And by the way, that project was a great success. It's now a publication that Sapo and I have, one of several. That led to one thing after another. And of course, somewhere along the way, as part of the intrigue, I'll say about Sapo is I thought, wow, he is performing with me at a more graduate student level. And then I started to realize it wasn't just me. There were about three or four other professors that Sapo was working with who he had similarly intrigued, who similarly probably worked with him earlier than they normally would, and who he was also having great success with. And so he's gone on to become the Rhodes Scholar, to create this home platform, Clematis, where he's trying to help other young students sort of find the love of science and find a voice in science. And so he's really kind of he's out there doing it way before his time, and I think it was really lucky for us to kind of meet. All right, so that's sort of to some extent that's the background of the story that brings us to here, because that's what stories do, right? They kind of bring you to the present moment. How did we all get together? Well, we all got together, because of this guy and the story that he's been leading as he goes through. And the thing that intrigued me a little bit is when he reached out and asked me to do this, he said, "Will you give a talk on storytelling?" And I'm like, that's a weird thing to ask me to do. I'm a cognitive psychologist. You'll see that as I go through some of the science behind storytelling. I'm an educational psychologist. I don't do research on storytelling. I don't. And so, why storytelling? And it kind of that was kind of in my head a little bit. And then I started having meetings with other students and talking to other people, and I started to notice how much I storytell as a way of presenting knowledge or information. It's nothing I've ever done consciously. It was never intended, but I now realize it's part of a process I have of trying to make everything concrete, trying to make everything make sense. And sometimes to make something make sense, some new bit of information, it needs the context. It needs that thing around it. And so I got more and more interested in this idea. Well, I don't know. I guess I do story tell. Maybe we can try to figure out why it works together a little bit and what some of the features are. By the way, one of the things I decided normally in a webinar like this, I would have PowerPoints, I would be using images, I might have quotes from famous people. I would have crafted this whole thing separate from my voice to kind of go along with my voice. That's not the tradition of storytelling. Storytelling is one person, one voice, maybe several people if it's a collaborative story. But often it's one person trying to present knowledge verbally. And so I decided, let's do that. Let's stay with the storytelling tradition. So you will see no slides. You will see no PowerPoint. Well, no, that's not true. I'm going to have one for a demo that I hope to do. But otherwise, I'm going to try to engage you with my words, and it's going to be difficult. One of the themes we'll talk about is that storytelling is an ancient art that maybe has some friction in the modern world. A lot of you right now, how many times have you looked at your phone since I started talking? We're all addicted to our phones, right? And our attention is easily pulled away. Storytellers need your attention. They need your sustained attention, which could be very difficult. So, but let's see if I can pull that off and let's do a little bit of a journey together. So, as I was thinking about storytelling, the first place I think to start, that's an obvious place to start, is to just see it as what it is, this oral tradition. So let's harken back to another story we've all heard, which is the story of the evolution of mankind, where we're told, as we evolved from our primitive ancestors, there were some critical periods that we all remember, their frontal lobes getting larger, the fact that we stood up on our back legs, freeing our hands up, and of course, the evolution of language. And these things combined, the frontal lobes allowing us to be more clever and strategic in how we're doing things, our hands giving us the ability to use tools, but language giving us the ability to transmit knowledge across peoples and across generations. That was super powerful. Just about every animal who cannot communicate in the rich way that we can, they have to teach their children things through observation, right? The children have to see the parent do stuff and learn stuff. We don't have to put, so let's say you want to teach your child, not to do something dangerous. Well, the only way for many animals is to, wait till that animal's in a dangerous situation and hope something happens that scares it or whatever, and it learns, oh, that's dangerous. But with language, we can warn them ahead of time. We can give them a story, about somebody who engaged in some behavior and very scary things happened to them. And through that story, we can produce learning and we can transmit knowledge. And this has been, before the written word, this was the dominant way cultures transferred knowledge from one generation to another. There were often very important people within a culture whose job it was to tell stories. One famous example of this is from some of the sort of ancient Greek or Roman times when people wanted to know the news of the world. They wanted to know what was going on in the different cities around them. But there was no television, of course. There was no newspapers. There was nothing like that. So, how did you know what was happening in the world? Well, there were certain individuals that would travel from town to town to town to town. And they would basically tell the stories of what's going on all around them. Now, why would anybody believe that they were telling true stories? Well, these people would often begin by showing off their memory skills and to show how well they could learn things, retain them, and then give them back. And so there's something called the method of loci. They actually developed processes for helping memory work better. And a lot of the things they used, we're going to visit today on our little journey of storytelling. So we'll kind of come back to that as we go. All right. So let's follow this oral tradition. But let me just say, in traditional storytelling is part of the norm. Yeah, absolutely, Mafuza. I mean, in a lot of cases, especially we can think of religious contexts as well, in which, certain individuals would memorize word for word critical books so that they could, in fact, present this to other generations. And before the book existed, of course, that was how it was done. It was by memorizing the actual words. Please follow Mafusa's lead. Feel free to throw things in the chat as we go, and let's make it, yeah, a little more discussion worthy. All right. So, why does storytelling work? Well, one of the things storytelling does is it kind of connects things in a structural way that often can preserve sort of temporal order. And sometimes temporal order is important, what happened when and what happened next. But also just to generally give a structure that helps somebody remember the knowledge. And so I want to this is going to be my one PowerPoint where I'm going to try to demo this for you in a bit of a fun way and kick stuff off. And I'm going to need your help. So what I'm going to need is for 10 of you to give me random words, any random word you want. I am going to show you that with a little structure on top of those words, I can, at least in theory, remember all of those words in order after you've seen it. Now, you're going to have to trust me for some of this because I'm going to have to not look at the chat. So, but you can trust me. Sorry, Sapo, can I share my screen right now? It's got me disabled.
Okay, give me a
We
second.
got 4 words so far. A few more words, please. Mm-mm-mm. Thank you. Keep them coming. That's 5.
Okay, can
And
you
again,
share screen
thank
now?
you. Okay. So what do we have here? This is, let me just get the chat up so I can see the words enough to do it. This is a rough sort of list of, I guess you could call it the story of my typical morning, my typical working morning. And I'm going to show how I can use a story structure to help me kind of bring in new knowledge. So this is just to show you quickly. When I wake up in my bed. First thing we usually do is go and empty the dishwasher, which we ran over the night. We go on a morning walk every morning just to kind of boot our brains and get our bodies in gear. We come back and have breakfast. Usually, we're having breakfast while we watch the news, kind of get caught up on the news. Then I brush my teeth, I get dressed, hop on my motorbike. And now the rest of this is more my knowledge that when I'm on my motorbike, I go by a school called Mowat Collegiate School. I go by a church on that path. I go by a mosque. And then I end up in the parking lot of my university. I set up my class, get everything ready to have class, get my PowerPoints up and all that stuff. And I grab a coffee and then I'm ready to go. Okay, so this is just my typical thing. Now, why is this important? It's going to help me hold a certain structure that will allow me to sort of attach the new knowledge I'm learning to the story and make that new knowledge now I'll be able to use the story to pull the new knowledge back. Okay, so let's see if we can do this. So what I'm doing here now is just taking these words, lamp,
I've
lamp,
compiled
light,
them in
chart.
the chat for you.
Oh, did you at the end? Okay. So this is where you guys get to all watch me kludgily do light. Yep.
Chocolate. Kidney.
Ignore my bad spelling if it happens. Yep.
Childhood.
Oops. Okay.
Nails. Engine. Bicycle.
Bicycle.
Truck.
Mhm.
Flower.
Okay, maybe I need more than 10 words. I'm sorry. Can we have four more words? And the reason, by the way, this is kind of important is if people just give you a list of words, your average person can usually remember what's called seven plus or minus two. That's how much we can hold in our memory. So now, what do we got here? Brook tree. So this is far outside the ability of our mental, our working memory is what we call it, our sort of thought process to hold. 14 items is too many to hold that way, so we need something else, and especially to hold them in order. So this is the claim of that with the right storytelling and the right connection of new information to this story, I will hopefully be able to remember these in order. And when I do this in class too, I also challenge my students, which is trickier for us to do today. But I challenge my students about two classes down the road to ask me this again. So, 4 days later, can I still remember it? And quite often I can remember at least 12, if not all 14, after 2 or 3 days. So it's an enduring way of kind of getting something into your memory. So I am now going to close the chat. You're going to kind of have to trust me on that, or people can just press enter a bunch of times so that you've scrolled off my chat. But I'm going to close the chat. So right now I just have this, and now let's just do the a little bit of silliness. But the silliness will include elements we're going to draw on all the way through. So wake up in bed. When you wake up in bed, what you might often do is sort of roll over and say good morning to your spouse or something like that. So let's imagine I do that, but instead of my spouse being in bed with me, there's a lamp sitting there where she should be laying in bed. And I'm like, what the heck is there a lamp in my bed for? That's bizarre. But so much. So we're going to use imagery and we're going to use what I'm going to call bizarre imagery every now and then. So when I go to empty the dishwasher, I open the dishwasher and this bright light comes out of the dishwasher, kind of like shining from the heavens coming out of my dishwasher into my face. And I'm like, what is that? That's kind of weird, but okay, whatever. I go ahead and I empty the dishwasher. And then my wife and I are on our walk in the morning, but it's like it's Easter morning or something because people have put chocolates all along the walk. Everywhere we go, we're seeing these chocolates, and maybe every now and then we pop back a chocolate because chocolate's tasty. Okay, that's all right. Finish the walk. Come back for breakfast, and what are we having for breakfast? We're having kidney pie. I think that's something people in the UK eat or something. I don't know. I'm vegetarian myself, so I would never have kidney pie. But let's say this is what's available to me. Oh, you have kidney pie for breakfast. And I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. All right, if that's what breakfast is. And then when I go and watch the news, instead of seeing the typical newscasters, there's just a bunch of babies on the news in their diapers, sitting in chairs, not talking babies like you see with the AI stuff, just babies. And I'm like, what is this return to childhood of the news? It's all about children on the news. That's kind of bizarre. I'm going to go a little quicker now, just to you guys get the sense of what I'm doing. So when I go to brush my teeth, for some reason, I just feel compelled to brush my fingernails as well with my toothbrush. It's something I feel compelled to do, and it makes my fingernails feel really good. Excellent. I then get dressed. Now, the part of me is good. The challenge for me is going to be remembering these things on the left in order too when I redo it. But anyway, I get dressed, and as I get dressed, as I get dressed, I go into my closet, I guess, to get dressed, and sitting in my closet is the engine of my motorcycle. Somebody's taken it out of my motorcycle and put it in my closet, and I almost trip over it. And I'm like, what? Again, there's a whole lot of what the heck going on in this story, which is the bizarre imagery. Okay, fine. Well, anyway, I take my engine, I put it back on my motorbike somehow. I hop on my motorbike. But then as I'm leaving the driveway, I'm realizing that's not a motorbike, that's a bicycle. Somehow I'm on my bicycle. Oh, maybe I'm on the bicycle because there's no engine in my motorbike. Oh, okay, fine. Riding my bicycle. I go by Mowat Collegiate, where there's a truck. I'm going to call it a monster truck. You guys see those monster truck things because we might get a little fun. Outside of Mowat Collegiate in the parking lot, there's monster trucks crushing cars and doing stuff. And I'm like, well, that's a different school day there. Okay. I go by the church that I go by, and it's covered in flowers. There's flowers everywhere. And maybe I figure there must be a funeral or something going on in that church, but okay, there's flowers. And then I go a little further And I go by the mosque, and the mosque is having a big book sale. They have a whole bunch of books, or book trade. Let's call it. Let's not be capitalist about it. Let's say it's a book trade where people can come and bring books and grab books, and so supporting their community through learning through the books. I get into the parking lot, and where I usually park, somebody has planted a tree in my parking spot. I'm not impressed. I don't know what to do with that, but I find a different place to park. Then I go to set up class, but as I go to set up my class, there are students in there fighting about some issue. And I tell them, you have to stop fighting. This is a place of learning. So I quell the fight. And then I grab a coffee. But yeah, when you get the coffee, you have to now bounce on a trampoline to get to the front of the line to get the coffee. And I see everybody bouncing on the trampoline to get in the line. I'm like, that's really strange. Okay. Kind of told that story really quick, made that all up. Now the thing is, if I now just get rid of this, it's scary because I haven't really processed that very much, right? Let me just get rid of some Senna stuff. What the heck? My helmet. So now I can't see the words. I don't have access to the chat, and I'm just going to try to go through that again. So I say I wake up in the morning. There's a lamp in bed with me. I go from there to emptying the dishwasher. A light shines out of the dishwasher. We then go on our walk, and there's chocolates all along the walk. I come back. Is it breakfast already? I think I come back and it's breakfast already. That's the part that gets me a little worried. But breakfast I know is kidney pie, which I didn't like. Go sit in front of the news, which is childhood. There's a bunch of children on the news. I go from the news to get dressed. Again, this is the part I'm a little worried about is my structure more, but I get dressed and there's an engine in the closet. So I say whatever I want to hop on my motorbike. I think I'm hopping on my motorbike, but I realize it's a bicycle. So bicycle is the next word. As I'm on my bicycle, I go towards Mowat Collegiate. You may notice, by the way, I'm kind of looking in the air. I'm imaging this whole. As I go through this journey, I'm imagining the journey. So I go to Mowat Collegiate. That's the monster trucks doing their thing. So I see trucks. I then go by this church, and there was flowers all outside the church. Go by the mosque after that, and it's the book thing going on where they're trading books. Go from there to the parking lot where someone's put a tree in my spot. Then go to set up the class, and there's a fight going on in class. And I finally go get my coffee, and you have to do the trampoline to get your coffee. Did I miss any of the pairs?
I think you did great.
Maybe I got them all. And so what you realize is by going through that, I've now got not just 14 random words that you guys came up with, but I'm able to kind of recite them in order. So I have the temporal order of those 14 words, which is pretty impressive. How did I do that? Well, this is where we can go back to our storytelling about storytelling. So the first thing that thing shows is the importance of structure. So I'm going to open the chat up again. Sorry. Let me stop sharing my screen here. Great. So by the way, let me just stop for a second. Any thoughts or comments on that little demo? It's a fun little demo. You can do it with your friends. You come up with your own, list of items that you can remember pretty well, and then show them how you can memorize all these random words, and then ask them to ask you a week later, and it'll be amazing for you that you'll still be able to remember a lot of that.
I think what's fascinating about what you just did, when you incorporate stories into any presentation that you make, you also memorize your script better as well, and you can like say very naturally. Because if you can
Yeah.
remember like random words through stories, and if you, let's say, are trying to pitch someone an idea or like a class presentation, and you incorporate stories in it, not only it makes your audience engaged, but it makes the speaker themselves be able to memorize what they're going to say because the
Yeah.
stories is like so powerful anyway. So if the audience engage, you yourself can easily memorize the script as well, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, 100%. And by the way, it also gave you guys a little bit of an insight into who I am, right? That little story from my life makes me less of this U of T professor coming to impart knowledge and more of Steve. That's how Steve wakes up. That's what Steve does. And those reduction in barriers when we start to feel each other as humans who are just talking, as you say, authentically, that can feel really good. And stories can kind of help us let other people know who we are and what we're about a little bit. And that makes us more interesting, more willing to be something that somebody would engage with. Okay. Now, we're also been highlighting something here, which is, the story I told was just a pretty boring story of my morning thing. But often when we tell stories, once a word is part of a story in this exercise, what do you think makes it easier or harder to remember? Yeah. So one of the things is, okay, let me describe this. We're going to get getting into memory here, but it's okay to get into memory here a little bit, I think. when we remember something, the process the brain uses is one of what we sometimes call pattern completion, where we don't just we don't just sort of cue our memory and say, I'd like to remember the third word in that list, please. If you try to do that, you're not going to remember the third word in the list very well. You have to kind of give memory something to work with, and you use that something as a hook in some way. And so all of those words in my list became things we associated the new word with. And so I can almost, go to the third one right away. I think the third one was chocolate because that was on the walk. But I'm using walk to pull chocolate out of my memory, right? And by imagining myself on the walk and seeing those chocolates along the way, that's what allows me to pull it out. So the words in my routine become the hooks that I can use to pull the new information I just learned. So by attaching the new information to something you can recall and pull back, then you have a better ability to draw that back. There's other things too. And so let's hit some of these things. In fact, the thing I was going to hit next, I'm going to wait till the end, which is about stories and emotion. Let me hold back on that, and let's just talk some of the sort of more boringy science stuff. It's not boring; it's all cool. But imagery, and the issue of what's called dual coding. That exercise uses a lot of imagery, and storytelling typically does. So let's first, like, what do we mean by imagery? What are we talking about? Sometimes when we talk about imagery, it's like we're hallucinating, like we're seeing visions in our mind. But we all know that those images are not the same as hallucinations. Like we don't believe them. It's like our mind can produce something that's like we're seeing it, but we also know we're not seeing it. So that all sounds kind of what? So let's experience it. And one of my favorite examples of this is to do the following. If you have some smallish building in your life, maybe it's a house you grew up with, but don't pick a skyscraper or anything like that. Imagine a smallish building you know well. And I'm just going to ask you a very simple question about that building, but I want you to introspect on what happens in your mind when I ask you this question. So the question is, how many windows does that building have?
Are you asking us to imagine a
Yeah,
small building?
I'm asking you to actually do that. Imagine that small building, and then, what do you do in your mind when I ask you how many windows does it have? What are you experiencing? Okay. Well, most people say one of two things. They experience one of two things. One is they go into the house, and from within the house, they're imagining themselves walking from room to room, counting the windows from the inside. Other people, yeah, excellent. I picture myself walking in the building looking for windows. Exactly, Vincent. Going around counting all the windows. Some other people will say, I do it from the outside. So I'm outside the building. I'm walking around the outside of the building looking up at it, but again, counting the windows. Now, as we do that, that's imagery. Whatever that is, it's imagery. I think about the number of windows in my apartment unit, then think about how many apartments are on each floor, and then think about how many floors. Okay, so we got a lot of math going on here with the Verra. But that first part, I think about the number of windows in my apartment unit. When you say that, I don't think you think about it just in a math sense. I think you imagined yourself looking at the windows in your apartment as though you were there, sort of like a VR experience, but almost not as, with VR, they sometimes say, wow, you take off the headset and it's like a whole other reality is there. Imagery isn't like that. Imagery can coexist with vision. We don't confuse the two, but it has vision-like qualities. And that brings in, so when I talked on in that story, when I say I wake up and I roll over in bed and there's a lamp there, when I'm saying that, I'm painting a picture. And stories always paint a picture. And that picture involves sometimes senses beyond just the word lamp, right? Turning over and being surprised by the lamp there, that's the emotion. We're going to get to that in a moment. But just that whole image or the dish when I said when I opened the door and there was a light that came out, right? That's a whole image. And so now we have the word light that we're trying to remember, but we also have this image of me opening the dishwasher and having that shine forward. So good stories paint a picture. And it can be smells, and it need not just be visual stuff. It could be smells. I walked into my grandmother's kitchen, and there was that smell of freshly baked bread or freshly made food that grandma always makes. That becomes a huge part of our story. When you start to add other senses beyond just the visual, you start to actually think about that concept at a deeper level and bring in vision, bring in sound, bring in smell, bring in, how it feels maybe in some cases. These all become separate avenues for memory. So we often call this dual coding if there was just two. If it was just, oh, you're going to see the word plus imagine it, we'll call that sort of a dual coding thing. But the more sensory levels you can attach to it, the better. And a real good storyteller has that sort of artistic quality. Part of what they're doing beyond the information they're giving you is really putting it in a context that brings it to life, makes it a little more three-dimensional. And once you have that, it's much easier to pull that back into your mind later. It's almost like every sensory thing you connect with it becomes a separate hook to memory. And now you can use any one of these hooks or multiple hooks to bring that back. Okay, so that's the dual coding thing. Let's jump back to the emotion thing. Good stories often have emotion. I started this story and I tried to emphasize that word intrigue. That Sapo, when I first met him, intrigued me. He was unlike any other student. I sensed there was a story to him. I was curious. He piqued my curiosity. I kind of wanted to know more. Is this kid really connected to his previous teachers? For example, the way he talks, like he was talking, like I think they would try this in their classrooms. I'm like, really? A principal, your previous principal would respect you enough and talk with you enough about this and actually change their practice. Educators don't often want to change their practice. And so is this kid just cocky? Is it like if I call him on this and say, hey, let's do it, is he going to come back with his tail between his legs in a few weeks and go, you know what? Yeah, they weren't interested, which is honestly what I would have bet probably, but it wasn't what he was putting forward, right? He's putting forward confidence. They were going to do this. And so I became intrigued. What will happen? I'm curious. And so that emotionality that you bring into stories can really kind of help the audience become more deeply engaged. They want to know. And that's the best way to learn information is to do it what we call intrinsically. You're learning information not to get a good grade, not because there's some reward for learning the information. We call those extrinsic rewards, but you're learning the information because you want to know, and that's what curiosity is so great for. Curiosity is the state of saying, I want the answer to that. Now, by the way, you see people use this in conventional storytelling, like TV, streaming series. What do they love to do? They love to have cliffhangers. They love to, have plot twists. They love to do things that surprise you, make you curious, make you wonder, like come back next week and you'll find the rest of this. That state of mind because really as teachers or as the person who wants to impart the information, we can only do so much. Most of the success of that process comes from the receiver side. Are they thinking about what we're saying? Are they thinking about what we're saying deeply enough to connect it with images and such? That's what we need. Well, what's going to make them do that? They have to want to do that. If they don't want to do that, you can be the best teacher, you can structure the knowledge, you can try to present it in clearly as you want with all sorts of imagery and all this kind of stuff. If the learner is just not interested, if they're too busy looking at their phone and seeing if anybody's shared a post or whatnot, and they're only just barely listening to you, that's it. It's not going to work. So you have to engage them. And that's where the emotion comes in. That's where the character of these things come in. The personalities that you create, kind of painting a picture of the Sapo that I saw in those first classes. He becomes now a character in this story. And more than that, he becomes so I particularly, of course, told a story about Sapo. I could have told a story about anybody, a bunch of different students that I use just to try to show you how storytelling works. But why Sapo? I think a lot of you guys know Sapo. I think you're curious about him a little bit. And when I give you parts of the puzzle that you didn't have before, that makes you a little more interested because you've already got a personal connection with Sapo. So that's the other thing that stories can do as we talk about all of this, is they can really show you the personal relevance. They can bring out, often it's because the storyteller is talking about the impact some experience had on them. So I can be talking about the impact that meeting Sapo had on me. But because he's a character, you're probably naturally thinking, yeah, when I first met that guy, he seemed a little different from other people I met too, whatever. And that starts to create a personal connection where you become part of the story. And the more you can make the receiver of the story feel like they're part of that story, embedded in it, now again, it's almost like that whole additional level of realism, of sensory realism, of being part of that. And all of that is going to encourage us to think more deeply about what we're saying, to connect it with other things we know, and to ultimately get that memory advantage. Okay, so I'm just noticing, Sharithi, I want to see this. Are there ways train ourselves to naturally include sensory details and emotions when we tell stories, especially in high pressure situations like conferences and presentations? What a great point. For a number of points. When you're going to give a presentation, especially when you got like 15 minutes, you can feel like it's all about efficiency. I got to stuff so much. I got so much I want to say, and I got to put all that stuff. So I'm going to go bang, 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 bang all the way through. And you can kind of sacrifice the story for the information. Um, but this is one of the things I think about when Sapo invited me to do this. I know I often fall into this. I talk about stories I've learned or information I've learned from my previous supervisors. So I bet Sapo has this image of these people he's never met before that are my previous supervisors, that a lot of information comes through. And one of them said to me at an important time, people, especially when you're going to a talk at a conference where there's person after person after person, if as the presenter, optimally, you would have one strong claim you're making, maybe two things that you want the person to leave your talk in their head with. At the stretch, three. Three is the most extreme, and you're asking a lot of your audience to leave your talk remembering 3 points. So don't try to give them four. Don't try to give them five. Don't try to give them six. Don't go any further than three. And if you can get it down to two, what are the two things that you really want people to get? And now tell the story that really highlights those things well. So that includes taking the time, that you could have been presenting other data or other knowledge and using that to tell the story of why the data you are presenting are as important as they should be. And that involves, helping the audience sort of paint the pictures. So again, you train yourselves to do this naturally. That's where it kind of came in at the beginning. It's funny. I've had discussions with that. So I realize now I have all these characters in my life. So one of them is my co-creator of Peer Scholar, a guy named Dwayne, and we have discussions about we ask students to peer assess other students, doing something like let's say giving a talk, and we'll say, there's some people that are really good at giving talks, but they're not really good at assessing other people. And these skills might be separate. Other people might be like, you might be like, you watch one of these singing shows, singing competitions, and you might feel like, hey, I can tell who's a good singer and bad. I can tell who's on pitch. I can tell who's got character or nice tone in their voice. I know the things to look for. And then someone says, oh, okay, you know all this thing about singing. I want to hear you sing. And you're like, oh, I can't sing. That's a whole different story to ask me to sing. And so similarly, a lot of us, I think, do this stuff naturally, but how can you train yourself? I think starting by becoming aware, for sure, of these factors and how you can use them, but also it's always so. So I have this formula: skills equals knowledge plus practice. You start with the knowledge, and then you practice. And so your next presentations that you give, you will probably have to do it unnaturally. And what I mean by that is say, okay, Jordan says I just need to pick two or three things. What are my two or three things? What's the story I could tell around it? And being very explicit about trying to craft that story, bringing in sensory details. By the way, great songs. I like to write songs, and one of the things they teach you when you write songs is to use words that evoke sensory things, because they bring the song to life. So I think we as scientists, our competition is not that good. Scientists are not good at being, fascinating and exciting and interesting. And so that's one thing to realize. Your competition is not very good. So you can up your game a little bit and stand out, pretty quickly, by being the kind of scientist that really wants to communicate that information, wants people to leave thinking about what you just said. But always the path to natural is usually unnatural, is usually doing it intentionally. Now, sometimes, like maybe I just did it, and I can tell you this too, a little bit of psychology. We tend to remember concrete words, a word like truck or shoe, better than abstract words like justice or love. And one of the reasons for that is because those concrete words bring emotion, that they bring vision to life. They have, there's things you can see or imagine easily, whereas love is kind of vague. It's harder to have an image or a justice, etc. And that goes up to concepts. And when people are teaching concepts, they can teach you abstract concepts. I was never good at abstract concepts. When a professor started doing something up here, this is sort of related to that. So I was the student with my hand up saying, "Can you give me an example of that, please? Can you give me a concrete example of that theory and how that plays out?" I needed that as a person. I couldn't understand things abstract. I needed to get through the concrete to get to the abstract. And I think that's what I do as a teacher now. When I see my students, I think, "Oh, they just didn't get that. I got to give them a story. I gotta give them a concrete example of this." And so maybe, part of sometimes your own limitations can lead to skills that you didn't anticipate having. Anyway, great question. What have we done? We've done so the emotionality that makes it more engaging, the imagery, the structure, the personal relevance. All of those things are sort of the key elements that make stories really important. Also, by the way, the humanizing of the storyteller themselves. We tend to trust and learn best from people that we feel we know, that we feel we like. And so by being a good storyteller, you're also creating your own trust. You're making people think, hey, this person's telling me about stuff from their own life, and they're being open and honest with me, and now they're sharing this information. It makes it more comfortable to kind of accept that information. Okay, so now I just want to kind of open things up to discussion, but let me just have, one last point for us to think about, because as I was kind of thinking about this talk, I thought, storytelling is one of those things that's truly amazing on so many levels and is becoming harder and harder every day. We live in a world where, hmm, I'm going to back up a bit. When we're trying to attend to something, what does that mean to pay attention to something? When you attend to something, what you attend to is what's getting into your mind, into the what we call working memory, the place where you can actually kind of think about it deeply. But how do things get in your mind? There's two ways. One way is you decide to pay attention to something. You say, I'm going to read this chapter. I'm going to focus my attention. I'm going to, get those words into my head and I'm going to think about them. So a conscious, focus of attention on something. Um, or the environment steals your attention. And this happens all the time. It's a survival mechanism. So our attention systems are automatically attracted to what are called onsets or offsets. Anything that suddenly shows up in our world or suddenly disappears, that's a potential threat. Especially something suddenly showing up is a potential threat. And our brains have been wired to shift our attention to that onset right away. Thanks to things like these, that process that I just described has been completely weaponized by our phone that continually is sending us onsets, beeps, vibrations, various things to tell us, hey, something's happening over here, something's happening over here, and we keep getting our attention shifted. Storytelling requires that sustained attention. That's why the quality of the storyteller is so important, because they have to pull you in and engage you. And in the modern world, they have to do it quick, because if they don't, your attention is going to get diverted. And I wonder, how many people during this talk, how many times have you checked your phone during this talk? It's not that young people these days don't have an attention span, don't have an ability to pay attention for a long period of time. We can all watch Lord of the Rings for 3 hours, right? And focus our attention on it. We're all able to do that as long as our attention doesn't get pulled away. But we live in a world where things are constantly pulling our attention away. And that's going to be a challenge for storytellers. It is also an opportunity. If you can do this well, you can give an audience a really different experience. Like I sat in a lecture and I didn't look at my phone for an hour because I was intrigued by that lecture. That's the potential power if you're good at it, but it's really, really, a difficult thing to fit in the modern world. It's almost like we need to learn how to tell stories quickly before the person gets diverted. And that's not what telling stories should be about. We imagine people around a fire, relaxing, and the storyteller having the liberty of time to really unfold a story in a way that keeps us engaged, keeps our curiosity happening, keeps those images forming. That's not a quick thing. That's a craft, and it's a hard craft for the modern world, but a really valuable one. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there and just open things up for questions, which, by the way, you can throw in the chat, but also feel perfectly comfortable opening your mic and sharing your voice, sharing your story a little bit with us, humanizing yourself if you want to join in for the conversation. But I will now leave it in the hands of all of you and Sapo. And thank you, Sapo. This has been a fun talk.
Thank you so much for that lovely 1 hour or 45 minute conversation. It was so cool. And meanwhile, I would love everyone in the audience to ask a question. As you can see, Professor Joordens is a great storyteller. He has told us a beautiful story about how to storytell for 45 minutes, which I think is an incredible job. So I want to summarize what you have said, and maybe you can like add on. So I think the first point you made is that language, which is something that humans have created. It enables us to tell the story. It enables us to learn something. And unlike animals, humans use language to tell stories, which allows us to transfer knowledge and meaning across time and generation. And I think that's a very cool point. And that speaks to why language and the stories are so important in our lives. And I think the second point that you made was that you should try to introduce an element that sparks curiosity, like sort of like how you told a story about me. And I think that's crucial in storytelling because, you can have a cool imagery that makes the content stick, but if you don't make the audience interested in your story in the first place, then everything kind of falls apart. So I really like that point. And of course, once you maybe hook the audience with that curiosity, then you create a good story that paint a picture. So good stories create vivid imagery that helps the audience see what you're talking about. And for instance, in a scientific talk like which probably have a lot of abstract concept, Professor Joordens, I think, recommend you to incorporate concrete language like truck, like how he mentioned, like how the word truck is more memorable than an abstract concept like justice. So I think that was the example you gave. So the idea is we incorporate concrete language like truck to bring abstract concepts to life. And I think the last point that you made was to focus on one or two core ideas. Why? Because we want to avoid overwhelming your audience, right? Like if you have 4 points, we forget what point are you trying to make. But if you have 1 or 2 points, then you can knit your stories to these 1 or 2 key points. And now everything is sort of tied together. And I think then you have a good story to tell. So
Yep.
I think that hopefully sums up your talk. And for the audience, hopefully that helps as well. So I have a question about this era of generative AI.
Hmm.
And now that we have so many stories out there in the world, and how do you think generative AI like ChatGPT play a role in storytelling? Should we use it to improve our storytelling ability? Can we use it to learn? Or how do you think is the best way to tackle in this era of generative AI in terms
Yeah,
of storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I'm doing a lot of work in AI now in a bunch of different ways, trying to figure out how we can use it to enhance education in general. But there's a couple of things that come to mind with respect to Gen AI, and one of them is some of you have probably heard this notion of brain rot. That it used to be that if, let's say, you had to write an essay on some topic, that's sort of storytelling, right? You had to figure out, well, how am I going to introduce the topic? What am I going to present first? How am I going to build this up? And so you were kind of learning how to logically structure a narrative, which is a story. And now, with Gen AI, you can get to do the first draft, and hopefully only the first draft, hopefully only the first draft. But even then, a lot of people worry that some damage has already been done because it's now given you sort of a narrative to follow, and now you've lost the experience of creating that from scratch. And it's that experience that builds the skill. And so if you're having chat gpt always create that first narrative for you that you are now just polishing to make better, okay, you may end up with a product that's pretty good, but what did you actually gain through that process? Did you gain any good skills? Did you gain things that will help you succeed through life? We may be kind of taking the legs out of it under ourselves a little bit when we use it. Now that's sort of the negative side. On the positive side, it can help you, and you may have seen, let's just flip this up. You may have seen this here in my background for a moment, which is a perplexity output of me talking to it and working with it to develop the story of the story I wanted to tell today, right? So I'm going back and forth with it a few times to kind of hone this, and it brings in some things and some examples. For example, those concrete examples that I might not have thought about right off and seen. And so if you can work interactively with it, and the trick is to keep that deep engagement, to not just let it do stuff for you, but to think about what it did and say, okay, that's good. That makes my story better, but I don't like this. And how do I move that? And as long as you're really deeply embedded in that, you're still kind of getting the advantage. So I think, that's the challenge that a lot of us face now is how to use ChatGPT in a way that makes us better. Not get us better marks, makes us better. And that can be a challenge, but I think it's possible. Yeah, it's also possible though to kind of sabotage ourselves. So that's the trick. That's the scary part. I see Mufasa here. How important is is common language for storytelling. I am posing the question as an educator. My audience has various life experiences and language abilities. Yeah, I mean, as soon as you start using words that somebody doesn't really understand, it's almost the opposite of that sensory thing, right? Where images are coming to mind, you use a word and they're like, ugh, I got nothing to connect that word to. It's not bringing anything to my mind because I don't even know what that word means. And if you have two or three or five or six of the, if you're the kind of person that likes to impress other people with your intelligence by using big words, you may be doing the opposite of storytelling. You may be literally disengaging people who don't have your same level of vocabulary. And so the more that you can be, I will so often give some abstract thing, and I know it's kind of pushed my students a little bit. We'll talk about, well, you saw me do it with imagery, in a sense, where we'll talk about what's visual imagery, and everyone, that's sort of an abstract. Yeah, yeah, we have some visual images in our head. What do we mean? Okay, let's do that little house example, and let's get, and that's just small build, no big words there, small building, well, go in, walk around, how many windows, and let's all have that experience together, and then go, oh yeah, okay, that's what we're talking about. And so it's not that you cannot use bigger words, especially if they're appropriate, especially, in our domains in science, sometimes there are terms that we have to use. But if it's an odd term and you worry that some of your audience may not understand it, the more quickly you can kind of break it down into a very basic thing that everyone can understand so that they then go, oh, that's what he means by visual imagery. Okay, I'm with him now. Then that's important. So yeah, the more you can have common experiences and not expect, a high level of intellectuality, the more you can be a normal person that can talk to people like that, the better. Yeah, fantastic. Others, please feel free to join in. All right, sure. Excellent. Nice to see
Uh,
you, man.
Hi, Professor Joordens and Sapo. I just had a question on how you can use storytelling in like STEM fields or when you have like very technical information.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most important almost because that is unless you just want to talk to other STEM people, but especially people who work in STEM fields who want to communicate with the general public. So, let's imagine you're working on alternative energy sources, but you're trying to convince politicians, to do a certain thing or to act a certain way. Now you can't talk to them like they're scientists, because they just won't, you'll go over their head and they'll think this guy's some geek and who knows what the heck he's talking about. You got to find a way to take those technical things and come up with an analogy. So analogies can be very powerful. It's like the bicycle. In a bicycle, if the chain is too loose, then the bicycle won't really work well and the chain will fall off. I mean, same thing with this electron microscope. Somehow, it's kind of like a bicycle in that way. It's different in so many ways. But if we don't have enough of this energy, or if the energy is too variable, that's like a loose chain on a bicycle, and the whole thing just won't work. So learning how to accurately take what you're doing at a technical complex level, but think of what's the critical element the audience needs to understand about this. They don't need to understand it as well as I do. There's a factor here that's really important to the point I'm making. Can I take that part of the technical thing and break it down so that anybody can get that? And even though they don't completely understand it in the context I'm working, they get the point that I'm making about it. And as long as they trust me, and that's the other part of the story, the fact that yeah, let's do this. The fact that you care enough to take that complex thing and try to break it down, that already develops trust. When we've done research on what makes a good online professor good, the first factor is what we call teacher presence, instructor presence. They feel like they're there and they care. When you tell stories, when you try to communicate something that's complex, you're telling that person, I care about you understanding this. I'm not just going to say this and have it go over your head. I really want you to understand. And so I'm taking the time and effort to break it down. Even if they don't go with you, even if they can't make that connection, they like you better. They feel like you've respected them more and you've tried. And so that alone has mojo. And if you're good at actually kind of creating that analogy, now you actually potentially reach your goal of having them with you, stay with you. And that's kind of what you want with a story, right? You don't want to leave people behind. You want them all along on this ride together.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. Also, I had a question on like, what do you think are like common mistakes you see when like people try to storytell?
I mean, sometimes I see people with a lack of confidence. I think this would be the biggest trick, which is hard to say. Storytelling is performance, and I think part of, why it fits with me is I love teaching. I mean, I literally feel like teaching. I call it one of my two therapies in life. I got all this work, all this stuff causing stress. It's stuff I care about too. But when I step into the classroom, it's like now I get a chance, I guess, to tell a story. And I never really thought about it that way, but to perform and to do whatever. And the best storytellers do that. It's fun. It's enjoyable. They're up there and they're trying to tell that story. And the ones that sometimes are self-doubting and worrying and is this going well? And then that kind of derails things, right? The best stories feel like we're being taken on a ride. And so take them on a ride. Don't doubt whether they're with you. Craft that story as well as you can, and then just try to present it with emotion, authenticity. And the more you can do that, then you'll start to feel the feedback loop. And so that's the other thing I would say, while you're practicing this, and it may take practice to get the storytelling well, look in the eyes of people that are in the audience and kind of say, are they with me? Does it feel like when I tell a little joke, sometimes you want to put in a little emotional stuff, even silly little dad jokes or whatever you want to do, almost as a check, are you with me? You say that, and if they all kind of laugh along and chuckle or groan or whatever, doesn't matter. You just want a reaction. If they react, they're with you. And that kind of tells them, oh, some other people in the audience are with us too. We all did that together. And so establishing that sort of feedback loop can help guide you. And when you see instead that they're staring into space or whatever, you now have the signal like, okay, I've lost them somewhere. What can I do to bring them back? And that's where, yeah, sometimes funny stories or jokes or things like that you can bring to kind of get everybody back in line and then continue your story can work. It's funny though. Again, I never really think about it. I'm describing these things, but it's not. I just go in there and have fun when I do it. So I don't feel like I had to learn it. But when we try to unpack it, those are the thoughts I have.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Professor Jordan.
Thank you, Shrith, for being so interactive. It makes the storytelling more fun when you have an audience member that's chiming in every now and then and playing part of it. So I appreciate your attendance today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jared, and thank you, Steve, for the lovely conversations. I think we will now conclude, and it's 4 p.m. in the UK, and I think 11 a.m. in Toronto. So again, I want to thank you, everyone, for coming to this session and for attending the Catalyst Dialogue series with Professor Steve Joordens. We're grateful you have joined us for this inspiring conversation on storytelling, psychology, and we hope it sparked, everyone with new ideas and perspectives, and hopefully we look forward to seeing everyone again at our future events. Thank you so much, and bye-bye. Great.
See y'all. Thank you, Sapo.
Hi again. Before we conclude this recording, I wanted to share a short message with everyone. Just after the session ended, we learned something truly moving. One of the high school participants had tried to join us all the way from Kyrgyzstan, but despite facing repeated technical difficulties, she showed remarkable determination to be part of the conversation that we just had today. And what touched us even more deeply is that she had prepared a short story and a speech to share with everyone. Moments like these remind us why this work matters, to break down barriers and honor every effort to learn, to grow, and to connect across distances and differences. I'm truly in awe. Here's a glimpse of what she had planned to share, which is a powerful, heartfelt message in her own words about what she feels about storytelling.
Hello, my name is Sabina. I'm 14 and I'm from Kyrgyzstan. Through Access Micro Scholarship Program by US Embassy in my country, I had the chance to visit a local orphanage with our group. We prepared gifts, warm clothes, food, toys and books. But the main idea was spending time with kids, talking, playing with them. And I saw how a small Kaya talking, smiling with someone can make a big difference. That day changed me. I realized that the Kaya is an act. Since then, I started to see storytelling as a way to share kindness and hope. I want to learn how to speak in a way that touches people's hearts to make a positive change in my community.
Upon hearing Sabina's story, Professor Joordens had kindly asked me to share this message. This kind of perseverance, kindness, and empathy is exactly what the world needs. It's not just about what you say, but the courage it takes to try and the desire to make a positive impact on our community, even when the odds are against you. Please tell the student that we see you, we hear you, and that your voice matters deeply. So thank you, Sabina, for sharing your thoughtful and inspiring message, and thank you, Professor Joordens, for your kind comments and offering insights into storytelling. Sometimes the stories that don't get shared speak the loudest in our hearts. To every young change maker who shows up even when it's hard, you inspire us all. Thank you again, and bye-bye.
Clematis Research Empowerment Hub. Empowering research for everyone.